Hey Saber fans, welcome back. So this is going to be part 3 of Let's Build a Saber. So let's jump right into it. So we need to heat up our soldering iron, which I just did to 700 degrees. We're going to clean off our soldering tip so we get it all nice and shiny using our cleaner here. Just prepping the tip to add some solder to it. So we need to tin our tip. That is just adding a little bit of solder to it so we get a nice flow. So with the Crystal Focus 10, we're going to be bridging the RGB, red, green, and blue dye. So we're just going to tap our soldering iron to the pad. There we go. Clean that off. We did our RGB on the positive side, on to the negative side. What you're basically doing is just putting just a little bit of solder on there to fill the pad. Keep cleaning our tip off a couple times here. Alright, so that's it. It only takes a second to heat up the pad. Tap a little solder to it and it should flow right on. So next part 2, we want to bridge all the pads on the positive side because we only need to run one wire. So I like to take some of these old resistors I don't use and use the metal part of the resistor. Works out pretty well because it stays thin. Easy to bend across the pads. Some people use wire. I like to use these little resistors. Heat up the resistor end, put a little solder on there. And then our iron again. And we're just going to basically tap it down here. Bend it over a little bit. Solder. There we go. Bend it across. Blue. That is it. So they are all bridged now. So snip off that wire. So they're bridged all the way across, as you can see, all 3. So we'll just run one wire off of the blue down the Saber and that will connect all the positives. So now we have our negatives. So to figure out how much wire that we need, for this part we're just going to do some small pieces, enough to hang out the back of the housing here, and then we're going to resistor those and then run the rest of the wire down the length of the hilt. That's why I like to keep my hilt up here so I know how much wire will need to be ran. So let's grab some 30 gauge. This is the benefit of having different colors here. So we have our green, blue, and red. We're just going to take all 3 of these, line them up. Snip off a bit here. And you can always shorten these more if you want to. Put that off to the side. Wire strippers. Go to the top here. So the first one is 30 gauge. You only want to take off enough basically for the size of the pad. You can see there. shouldn't have any extra non-insulated wire hanging out off of the pad. I get as much of the uninsulated wire onto that pad. So just like how we tin the pads on the LED, we're going to be tinning the pad. We're tinning the wire here off our tip. We're going to be cleaning off the tip a lot. You should be, because you shouldn't have all that build up. So solder on there. This takes a second. You'll see it flow on there. So we're going to be running it down. You have these little slots here on the side where it breaks, it curves. So make sure it's facing that direction. It only takes a second to tap. Just make sure that it doesn't flow over onto the other pad, onto like the green next to it. As you can see, there's no extra exposed wire. So when you bend it, you get all the insulation that goes down the side. So I'll move on to the green one. There you go, give a little tug. Make sure it has a good joint. The wire again. And those three are good now. So for the positive side, we're going to be using I usually like to use yellow for the positive, but you can use whatever color you want. Just keep it a different color, and you can try to stick to the same color that you use all the time. Then it doesn't become a hassle when you're trying to remember which one's which. When you round it down the hill, you're like, oh no, I don't remember which wire is the positive on the LED. So I always use yellow. Use red, I guess, if you want to, but this is 24 gauge. So we're going to take our hilt, put this over here. So our LED is basically going to sit right around this area here. See where the retention screw is. Make sure you just have enough space between where your switch is. So just remember, you got to cram some wires in here. Ultra Saber hilts are pretty big, so definitely have plenty of space for your wire management. So I just like to take my wire, measure it out. Always leave extra. So you can always cut it off at the end. I like to leave extra because you have to take in mind that you're going to twist the wire. The thicker it is, the shorter it's going to be when it twists. And then you have to figure out where it's going to run into your soundboard. So I know mine's going to run generally to that area, then I always go a little bit extra. So I just want to make sure you don't want to have joints down at the end as well. Get that out of the way. So we're down to the 24 spot on our strip. Just need a little tiny piece. Take it off. There we go. And I like to put it to the blue side. The positive. Little tap. There you go. Thicker wire is always easier to get on there smoother, just because it has more surface area. So that's it. So we're going to take, I have a little box here I use on the side where I keep all my wires. Get our thermal tape. I already have a piece that popped off there. Take our housing. You're basically just going to line up the holes. Make sure it's somewhat in the center. Doesn't have to be perfect. must be cut a little funny. There you go. A little press there so it sticks. And then take off other side. There you go. I like this better than the paste because it's just less messy. You just have to pull it off and readjust. So you're basically just going to line up your holes here with your wires before you press it down. That's a nice thing with these silicone wires too, is that they don't kink up as much as regular wires do. It's no rush, so take your time. Finagle these wires in here. And we'll just square it up on the pad. Get it somewhat in the middle. There you go, give it a real press. Alright. So we take our focus lens, and then you can see it's a square in the back. And the LEDs is a square as well. So we'll just lay it on top. Try not to bump it too much. And then the top of the housing will keep the lens locked in place. Take a little screwdriver. This is the nice part about having this little groove back here. So you can tighten it down. Not going too crazy with it, but definitely want it snug so it doesn't come loose. And you can see in there, you can see the LED right down the middle of the focus lens. So on to our resistors. So I will put a link to a resistor calculator. You'll have to find out what the forward voltage is on your LEDs. So you can figure out what your resistors will going to be, and then your battery, if you're using an 18650 battery, it's going to be 3.7 volts or 4.2. Doesn't really make a difference. It's going to give you approximately the same exact thing. I like to use resistors on all of my colors. Some people only use it on the red. I like to use it on all boths, so, or all three. I'm just going to snip these a little bit shorter. Don't need them quite that long. So for my blue and green, they are the same resistor. I am using a 1.1 ohm resistor for those, and then red is a 1.5. And I've been resistoring all three of my LEDs ever since I started building Sabers, and I have never had one blow out or get fried up until, I guess if your LED just goes bad, but I've never had it fry at all having the resistors on there, where I have seen others that have not been resistored. So why change something if it's not broken, right? So we just took off some housing there. It's in our wires. Prep them for our resistors here. A little tap. And this is where our helping hands will come in handy. Because they are going to hold the resistor. do the green one first. We're going to snip off. We don't need all of this. We'll snip it off to the end, as you can see. Just leave a little bit there. Take the longer part, and the helping hands. Get off our soldering tip. Re-tin it again. Actually, you can pretty much tin it right on here. Get some solder on there. Start with green. Oh, and actually I forgot something. Very important part. Need some heat shrink. Can't be doing this without any heat shrink on here. So you don't need too much, just enough to cover the wire and the resistor end. Don't want any shorts. See, but it's okay if you make a mistake, because you can always backtrack. I forgot to put these on before. You want to lay this on the wire before you solder it up, or obviously you can put it on the joint. So since we had it sitting there, we'll clean that off again. Some nice fresh solder on there, nice and shiny, and give a little bit of tap. That's it. Slide that up. Chop that end off. And on to number 2. So this isn't too difficult. Might be a little intimidating in the beginning, but definitely do it enough times and gets much easier with anything. I've watched a couple of newer videos over the years when people are trying to do it or show an example or help or something like that. You know, they might put up a video where they're asking for assistance and they're showing how they solder, and it's funny, I guess I was shaky in the beginning too a bit, but I mean, some people are like, you know, they're trying to solder, and I mean, I guess that would be very difficult to be able to solder. You're that shaky. I don't know if it's just nerves or what. I would assume it's probably more nerves that they don't want to mess up, but you're not going to really mess anything up at this point. You can always unsolder it and redo it again. Not that big of a deal. So you can see how this is definitely an essential tool. It's helping hands. Piece of heat shrink here. Go. So when you're soldering the two pieces together with anything, if you're soldering wires together, you want to tin both sides, tap it together, and hold it there just for a second. You'll see it change from a liquid to a solid. As long as it's shiny, and give a little tug. But after a while, you'll know that it's a good joint once you see it. You'll just get used to seeing that same look. But give a little tug, and good to go. So those 3 are soldered up. We're going to take our heat gun. And as the name says, heat shrink, it shrinks up with heat. So you can see now it's heat shrink around the joints so that heat shrink will not slide at all now. And those are nice and secure. So now moving on to the other side, I like to grab the heat shrink when I put it in the helping hands. Just prep this real fast before we get more wire. There we go. Alright. Bear in mind too, these can get quite hot because maybe you're transferring the heat from the end into the resistor, so careful not to burn yourself. So let's go back to our wire. Have our, I guess I should just left these out. 30 gauge wires again. Try to be tidy when you're working. There we go. So, go grab our hilt again. And to stay. So we're going to just measure out how far we want our wire to go. Remember, always leave extra. You have to bear in mind too, it's going to bunch up top. You have everything in there, so always better to have more than less. You can always chop off, but it's more of a pain to have to add more and then add another joint, especially when it's a very tight build. I hate to add joints at the end. I like to have it pretty clean down there, so just measuring out my other wires here. Get them all the same length. One last one, got the green. So you can just use the current wire that you cut. Measure out the other ones. There you go. So now we put these back in the box out of the way, or however you want to store them. I just have a little table here with a box of all my different wire sizes, so they're convenient. Alright, so we have red first. Actually, let's tin all these wires first. Just take a little bit of the heat shrink off. So I would definitely say probably in the beginning it was frustrating to figure everything out, but say like anything, as you work through it and continue on building, you get better at it. You know what you like and what you don't like to do. I don't mind doing redoing sabers, and certain sabers, ones I can kind of put my touch on, like redoing the Ultra Saber builds, or obviously doing my custom ones I prefer over anything, because then I get to use all my creativity to make those. So I would definitely do something that interests you the most. There's a lot of saber builders out there right now, where there wasn't several years ago. Definitely popping up more. So I try to stay out of that realm of just doing installs. I guess some guys like to do it. What's in this one? What they like to do, just regular installs, nothing custom to the outside of the hilt or anything. They just do install work. And honestly, to me, that's not super fun, because you're just installing electronics. And saber after saber, I guess, just to make a little extra money is why they do it. And that's a good thing, I guess, if you make a few extra bucks doing it. Hey, if you enjoy doing that, then it's okay, but I would not get into doing it just for the sole purpose to make money. If you don't enjoy doing it, then what's the point in doing it? So, it's my 2 cents at least. Definitely do something that you're going to enjoy. Instead of just doing it for the money's sake. Now some of these resistor ends just get a little dirty, maybe in the manufacturing process, so you might have to do the joint a couple of times. There we go. I didn't like the way the first one, actually the first 2 looked, so that's why I redid those a couple of times. So it's okay to redo them. Doesn't always hit the first time. I'm gonna snip off a little high spot on there. There we go. So let's get some heat shrink again. Heat shrink the other side. You never have enough heat shrink, trust me. I think I've gone through, especially these small ones, quite a few boxes. And you think that you don't use too much, but in the end you do. Especially when you start doing quite a few sabers. Definitely adds up. Not expensive, but definitely go through quite a bit. One more piece here. A little piece cut. Oh no, that's wrong size. Okay, back to the box. Always nice to have it handy right next to you so you don't have to run all over the place to grab your parts. So I hope you're enjoying this tutorial and you find it interesting. I know I did in the beginning. And honestly, it's kind of soothing. I always tell somebody or people that that find out that I build sabers and stuff like that, and they're like, oh wow, that's really cool, that's a neat thing to do. Of course it is. I mean, who doesn't like a lightsaber? Let's be honest. But I always say that you have to find a hobby, something that you enjoy. It takes the stresses out of life. And this is, it's not a complicated thing or anything like that. I guess maybe in the beginning it can be, but then it becomes something that you can take your mind off of life a little bit and build some sabers. So what we're doing is we're just taking the wire here, we're gonna wrap it up, twist it, make it a little tighter. And so some people just twist the wire and leave it. And some wire you can get away with doing that. With the silicone wire, it just doesn't like to stay. And actually I've always done this for a while, is I like to take a couple little pieces of electrical tape here. And you'll see why in a second. take some heat shrink too. So I'm just going to twist the wire up here. And you do this because it keeps everything, gives you more space in your hilt first of all, keeps everything more tidy in there, and it allows the wire to bunch up a bit easier in the hilt. You get a whole bunch of wires running down there. It's a little crowded, especially if you have a smaller hilt to work with, or a shorter one, like a Shoto or something like that. Definitely gets crowded. So this will help with that. It'll also help with any kinks. Kinks are never good because they can cause breakage in the wire, so you can prevent any of that stuff. It's good. So we got 2 more steps and then we'll be done with the LED. Let's put this out of the way. You can use your helping hands to hold the wire. If you like, I just like to use the vise. So you can see it's twisted, but it doesn't stay that way, and over time when it sits in the hilt it will become even more untwisted in there. So what I like to do is I take the electrical tape just to hold the wire pretty temporarily, and then I take, depending on the length of the wire, this one I'm going to use 3, just 3 little pieces of some heat shrink. I guess it's a little bit of overkill, but I don't think so in the end, especially if it causes me less headache down the road, because I took a few extra minutes to put heat shrink on there, and it saves the customer from a broken wire down the road or a repair, because repairs are never fun. Nobody likes to do repair on their work anyway, because it means something went wrong. And if you're selling your sabers and not just doing it for yourself, nobody wants a broken saber that they have to send back. So if this keeps your wires all nice and snug together with less kinks or less chance of breakage, then a couple extra minutes that you take to do this, it is definitely worthwhile. So we're just spacing them out. I like to kind of space them out along the wire on the length, because we don't need them all right next to each other. You don't want too much heat shrink, because then that bunches up on you too. It makes it more solid. You want it flexible. Little heat there, shrink those up so they don't slide around. So that's okay. It doesn't have to be extremely tight. It's still, say when you push it into the saber, it still flexes, and that's good. That's what we want. So we have one more step we want to do. I like to cover my resistors. So we have our ends covered, but I don't like any type of scraping of my resistors in there. So we're going to take some heat shrink, measure approximately the length that we want to cut, the resistor length, and then a little extra beyond that. So it goes over the joints a little bit. Slide that down the length of the wire. This will also make the resistors all nice and tight together too. There you go. So this is where I want my joints to be the strongest. where all my resistors are. Heat that up. See it shrink around. Shrinks around the resistors and the wires. And that is it. It's nice and clean now. Everything is protected so we get no shorts. A nice strand of wire. And if you want, I already checked this before. Check the LED to make sure it works, but to make sure we are all good, we can snip off the ends here. Should be cutting these down anyway. Expose a little bit of the wire. And we can test it. So in the tools, part 1 section, we had our little tester that I showed. All we're going to do is, see if I can flip this up here. You can see the LED. Our positive. We're not powering the LEDs, we're just touching it for a second. Just to make sure they work. And we got our green. Good. Red. And our blue. That's it. So a nice quick check to make sure everything's all soldered well. I don't have any broken joints already. So I know when I install this, I checked it before and I knew it worked. So if I solder it to the board and it doesn't work then it has to be something else than what I did so far. So that is the end of this tutorial of soldering up our LED. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned a lot, and stick around for the next part and let's build a saber. Take care.